Trump not only has the vocabulary of a fifth grader, but he seems to have the judgment and the temperament of a third grader too. By the way, this is no offense to cute little third and fifth graders, because childhood taunts and temper tantrums are almost uncontrollable at that age. But as a former president and 3 times married 76-year-old, you would hope that person would know better than to attack their former press secretary in a pathetic social media post that reads, Kayleigh Milquetoast McEnany just gave out the wrong poll numbers on Fox News. I am 34 points up on DeSanctimonious, not 25 up. While 25 is great, it's not 34. She knew the number was corrected upwards by the group that did the poll. The rhinos and globalists can have her. Fox News should only use real stars. Whether Trump intentionally misspelled the word milquetoast or he just doesn't know how to spell the word, either way, he's revealing how petty he can be because he clearly doesn't understand the meaning of the word. Kayleigh McEnany is anything but milquetoast. She is someone who definitely stands up for what she believes in and has the courage of her conviction to speak it publicly and proudly before millions of people every week on a major television network. That's not what milquetoast people do. Not to mention, Kayleigh McEnany defended Trump countless times as his press secretary, proving herself a quick-witted study by answering questions about complex issues on a moment's notice, and especially having to clear up whatever mess her former boss left behind, since he can barely speak coherently on any issue without resorting to insults or deflecting attention from his ignorance on many matters by bullying people and treating them as if they owe him loyalty above truthful information that he needs to know. And Kayleigh McEnany isn't the first person that has been on Trump's side through thick and thin that he has needlessly turned on. He's done this with many other people. He doesn't care that he himself looks petty and small by insulting others, like the way he refers to Ron DeSantis as DeSanctimonious, which once again, Trump is using the word sanctimonious out of context because Ron DeSantis is not sanctimonious, not at all. Elizabeth Warren and AOC, they could be accused of being sanctimonious, not to mention hypocritical, opportunistic, and just as narcissistic as Trump is. But that's the thing about Trump. Just like children have yet to control their emotional outbursts, Trump seems to be incapable of controlling his petty, vindictive, entitled nature. It's as if Trump is his own worst enemy. I wouldn't be surprised if he's an actual psychopath. That is, someone who can't feel empathy towards others because of a neurological issue that goes beyond psychology. Though it is very possible he might be a sociopath, according to his niece Mary Trump's account in her book, Too Much and Never Enough. And without getting too much into the difference between psychopaths and sociopaths, one simple way to remember is that psychopaths are born and sociopaths are made. Another distinguishing characteristic is that psychopaths are calculating and patient, whereas sociopaths tend to be rash and impulsive. But the commonality between sociopaths and psychopaths is that they do not feel empathy towards their victims. They do not take into consideration how they damage other people. And they can also be sadistic, that is, they actually enjoy making their victims suffer. And while not all narcissists are psychopaths, supposedly all psychopaths can be narcissists. By the way, if I got any of this wrong, please correct me in the comments below. The last thing I want to do is mistakenly misinform anyone. And people like Donald Trump do not care about subtleties like that. He does not care about the truth, even if he did call his own version of Twitter Truth Social. I even wonder if he sincerely cares about his families, considering he's been married 3 times. And still he cheated on his 3rd wife with overpriced hookers while she was pregnant. This guy is clearly not a conservative, and he's hardly an astute businessman. Now, while I'm not a psychologist and much less a neurologist, I'd be willing to bet $1,000 at any of Trump's casinos, if they haven't filed for bankruptcy, that Trump is a bona fide narcissist, and a malignant one at that. There is more than enough documentation of how easily he will verbally abuse, attack, humiliate, and project his own wrongdoings onto others. And here's a perfect example.
Donald Trump is speaking at the West Side Conservative Breakfast in Urbandale, Iowa. Right now, let's watch.
What happens to these people? And then you look at what they've done to the January 6 people. They've destroyed them and destroyed their lives. And a lot of them didn't even go into the building. It was a disgrace. What's going on? That is a disgrace. That's going to go down in history ultimately. And Ashley Babbitt was killed, shot by, in my opinion, a rogue cop. He had no business doing that. He shot her unarmed And actually, people say she was trying to hold back the people that were pushing her forward. Ashley Babbitt was the one that was killed. She was the one that was killed. And they like to say 5 people. That's the truth is. And there happened to be somebody else also in addition to Ashley. But Ashley Babbitt was a big supporter of everybody in this room. And by every account, she was an incredible person and a great patriot. And he shot her just like he had no problem. And then they wanted to shield him, right? They wanted to and he ends up on NBC, being interviewed on NBC because he was so proud of himself. He thought he was a big shot. And they ought to look at his past record, by the way. Take a look at his past record.
The level of arrogance, entitlement, and downright pettiness is undeniably on full display at this press conference. But more importantly, Trump's ease with which he will deflect his own blame regarding January 6th by projecting it onto others is a true case study in shameless, self-serving narcissism, and destructive narcissism at that, because someone actually died, and he can't deny it. And yet he completely washes his hand from that by basically blaming it all on others. Because that's the thing about January 6th. Either Trump was ignorant of how the centuries-old process of our electoral college voting works, or he does know how it works, especially given that's precisely why he won the first time around, but he doesn't care because he believes he's entitled to be president. And while yes, it must be taken into account that the media coverage of Trump during 2020 was clearly biased, and many mainstream media outlets are complicit in lying by omission, particularly concerning the Hunter Biden laptop story. Despite all that, there was no evidence of a stolen election. Perhaps some voting irregularities at some voting locations, but the election was not stolen from Trump. As a matter of fact, the election was his to lose. Most incumbent presidents usually win a re-election, but Trump, as usual, got in his own way, especially during the first debate with Biden, where Trump basically unraveled before the nation's eyes. It's no wonder January 6th played out the way it did. And I wish more diehard Trump loyalists would be honest with themselves about the fact that had it been any other person who would have orchestrated that, they would have been arrested for gathering people at Washington, D.C. to disrupt that event. Especially anyone who would have tried to verbally intimidate Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the vote count. And Trump still talks about January 6th as if he has nothing to do with encouraging thousands of people to gather that day and to further encourage them to go and march to the Capitol as if nothing can possibly go wrong. If Trump becomes president again, it's very possible we will have even more dysfunction, polarization, and instability than we did while he was president. And he did do some good things as president too. But none of the good he did is impossible for anyone else to do. As a matter of fact, more good could have been accomplished by others without all the needless fights that he often instigated when they could have been avoided to begin with. He could have been so much more conciliatory, so much more cooperative, but he chose not to. And to a certain degree, I wonder if he just couldn't help himself due to his nature. It's why I had done this parody painting of Michelangelo Caravaggio's Medusa, with Trump as Medusa and all these snakes with the heads of Nancy Pelosi, Elizabeth Warren, and so many other political operatives that are just as complicit in the instability of our nation. And we need to call out all sides that are guilty. We need to be aware of everyone who gives government a bad name. And it doesn't have to be this way either. And I say all of this as someone who voted for Trump in 2020. And not because I thought Trump was such a great president, but because there was no way I could bring myself to vote for Joe Biden, who I also find to be a duplicitous, opportunistic narcissist. But even had I known that January 6th would happen, I still wouldn't have voted for Biden. Though, of course, I wouldn't have voted for Trump. I would have voted for whoever was the libertarian candidate that year. And for anyone who thinks that I would have just wasted my vote, it wouldn't have to be that way if we had ranked choice voting, where you get to pick a first choice candidate, a second choice candidate, a third, a fourth, and so on, depending how many are on the ballot. In a sense, you get to vote for everyone, or just a couple if you want. And then those with the least amount of votes obviously get eliminated, but there's still a winner. And at least it's a winner that reflects the true will of the people, as opposed to the false binary choice we're given in this country where it's winner takes all. We actually would have more choices with ranked choice voting and a truly democratic process that doesn't polarize us and, dare I hope, would actually solve many of our problems. Because that's the biggest problem with democracy in the United States. We're left with these false either-or choices between Democrats or Republicans, despite the fact that there's usually a libertarian or other candidates on the ballot. However, many people are almost left with no choice but to vote for either of the major candidates because it would seem like a wasted vote to cast it for one of the other candidates, even if the other candidates have better ideas and a proven track record for solving problems. It should be clear by now that Trump isn't the best choice and much less the only choice we have for a president. And it's not simply his pathetic attacks on his former employees and allies using words out of context that he doesn't even seem to know how to spell. It's his appalling sense of judgment to think it was a good idea to bully his vice president to overturn the electoral votes and essentially break the law. And recently, he's even called for overturning the elections because he thought he was wronged. How and why Trump is considered some sort of savior by evangelicals in particular, because of his supposed stance on abortion, it goes to show how easily manipulated people can be, especially when it comes to religious and magical thinking. So many people are more driven by their fears and ignorance of the unknown than they are by rational thinking of what they can and do know. And I wonder to what degree the tribalism that leads us to getting a president like Trump is a phenomenon of the blind leading the blind. In other words, how people will continue to support Trump just because so many of their family and friends do so as well and they don't want to upset those people, and yet to what degree those people that they don't want to upset, they're also operating out of fear of being shunned, and therefore you end up with this circle jerk of false support based on fear that everyone is secretly experiencing but not admitting to each other. This is probably why millions of Trump loyalists cannot see him for the petty, vindictive, short-sighted, unconscionably selfish, and ultimately malignant narcissist it's difficult to deny that he is. If I weren't an atheist, I would say, God help us if Trump becomes president again. And if I got anything wrong in this video, please let me know in the comments below. But if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell for upcoming videos, and check out the links below for my original art and merchandise. And thanks for watching.